Good afternoon, AP European History folks. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous Monday off. And it's not just gorgeous because it's a Monday off, but it's also a gorgeous day as well. It's Martin Luther King Jr. Day. My favorite Martin Luther King Jr. quote, "At the end of our struggles, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." That's a good quote. I like that. From a man who had many, many good quotes. Hope you're having a great day. We're picking up where we left off on the third page of the study guide. Right about there. We're going to talk about Darwin for a moment and then Italian unification. We're going to keep this under 15 minutes and hopefully roll all the way to the end of the study guide. That's the goal. Let's go. First question asks us about the theory of natural selection. You know a great deal about Darwin, so I don't want to linger here. But Darwin comes up with the idea that in order to survive, species, have to go through a series of adaptations. Those that do adapt are able to pass on their genes to another generation. Those that don't, unfortunately, are naturally selected out of the process. Later in his career, Darwin begins to apply the same strategy to human beings and expresses that idea. Now, we should keep in mind that he's going to rattle a lot of cages with this idea. We begin to see not just the biblical opposition, because Darwin is coming up with a different theory as to how animals and species were created, but there's also a lot of moralists in society who believe that taking human beings and putting them down on the level of animals isn't the way that we should go about things. So even though in 1859, when he initially publishes, Darwin catches a lot of flack, by a generation after, let's say by the mid-1870s, in the scientific community, it's pretty well established that Darwin's onto something. Let's talk about Italian unification. All the way along, we've been careful to use the phrase the Italian states because there hasn't been an Italy in a grand sense. In the 1860s, that changes, right? Under Cavour, who is the prime minister of Piedmont, Sardinia. Cavour's job is to go out and to try and carve out a northern Italian state. Initially, we're just looking for northern Italy. The southern Italian states were considered to be pretty backwoods. So getting those, not that much of an issue. The other big state in the south is the Papal States, which is really allied with the French, or at least looks to the French for protection. We can't hope to get that at this point. So what we're looking for is a state that combines together the largest of the Italian states in the north into one large functional Italy, that we can call it that. Okay. Cavour's a planner in the same way that Bismarck's going to be a planner when we flip the page here. He believes in real politics, that we have to look down the road. We can't just hope and imagine and think that everything's going to be great. We have to plan our way through. And that's why Cavour gets Piedmont, Sardinia involved with the Crimean War with France and Britain in a small way, but just enough so that he can open the conversation with Napoleon III about an alliance. The alliance should serve both sides well. Piedmont, Sardinia needs to take territories from the Austrians, and Napoleon would be advantaged as well by taking small territories as well and pushing the boundary of France. And it gets a little bit more cred for Napoleon III, a guy who's trying to live up to his uncle's shoes, trying to focus on the foreign politics as his domestic politics continue to unravel. More and more, Napoleon III is going to look abroad for distractions that will bring acclaim to him instead of the criticisms at home. Unfortunately, midway through the war, or early on in the war, I should say, Napoleon III decides, whoa, I'm doing all the heavy lifting. Why am I in this? And he bails on the war and makes a separate peace with the Austrians and leaves Piedmont, Sardinia alone. And at that point, Cavour thinks that his goose is cooked, that he's completely finished. But a lot of the northern Italian states begin to put together plebiscites or opinion votes on whether or not to join a union, and the votes come back very much in favor, which gives Cavour's movement a second life. And then he gets another lifeline, this one in the shape of Giuseppe Garibaldi, who's a romantic Italian nationalist. What Garibaldi wants is to combine all of the Italian states together, all of them, into one big republic. So he's looking for something that's a lot more liberal, in that sense a lot more nationalistic, than even Cavour is hoping for. Cavour kind of thinks that Garibaldi's a bit of a pistol. He's trouble. And so he sends him down to the southern part of Italy to go and fight in Sicily, thinking that either there or in Naples he'll meet his demise and Cavour can just focus on his northern movement. But Garibaldi wins. And eventually we're faced with this moment where Garibaldi possesses the southern Italian states, Cavour possesses the northern Italian states, and there's this question about whether or not to go into the Papal States. Now, Cavour realizes that if Garibaldi attacks the Papal States, it's over. because the French will get involved with the war and pick them to pieces. And he has to go down and convince Garibaldi that what they have, albeit not a completely unified boot, if you want to call it that, but what they have is enough. That it's the Italy that both of them have dreamed of. Garibaldi signs off on that. They create a new government that's a monarchy, led by Victor Emmanuel, who's the previous leader of Piedmont, Sardinia. And as a result of that, we are able to have this union. Now, my phone's ringing. I'm going to try and ignore this and keep on going, but if you hear it ringing, that's just a phone. We're just going to keep going. Next page. Page 4, talking about Bismarck and Prussia pushing towards a unification of Germany. Now, Prussia is a lot more interesting than the Italian situation. And the reason being that Bismarck is way more ruthless than Cavour is, and ruthless makes for good stories. So let's talk first about the Zollverein, which is a German customs union that's created by the Prussians to try and garner good relations with everyone around them. So during the 1830s and 40s, while the Austrians are sort of out in the cold, the Prussians are fostering a warmer and warmer relationship with the small Prussian states near them. By doing this, the Prussians are able to push themselves to the forefront of the unification process. Now, let's talk about Chancellor Bismarck. Bismarck is hired by William I, the leader of Prussia, to try and expand the state. No matter what Bismarck is doing, we were always looking out for the good nature of Prussia. If we're expanding Prussia into a larger expanded Germany, you have to understand that that's not for a greater Germany's sake. It's to protect Prussia more and more. To take that Prussian state, which is more of an eastern state, if you like, it's really closer to Poland than it is to the German side, and to morph it together with these new German states into a large, strong Central European state. Bismarck scorned anyone who thought that you could do this through good words and happiness, that the revolutions of 1848, in fact, had been brought about by hope and by dreamers, and they had been squashed. With Bismarck, it's about blood and iron. And if you don't have the blood and iron, you're not going to have the right result. So you have to be willing to shed some blood. Let's get a move on then. The first war is called the Danish War. Here, Bismarck is going to ally with the Austrians in order to go to war against Denmark to take two territories that the Prussians believe and the Austrians believe are more German than they are Danish. Those territories, Schleswig and Holstein, were then jointly monitored by the Prussians and the Austrians. Now, Bismarck's game here is to eventually end up in a problem with the Austrians. We need a reason for them to attack. And over time, the joint control of these two areas becomes a problem. And the Austrians attack the Prussians in what's called the Austro-Prussian War. Everyone thinks Austria is going to win. They don't. In a very quick war, a 7-week-long war, the Prussians are able to overwhelm the Austrians and defeat them. A lot of that is superior technology in a military hardware sense. They have better rifles. It's also a better railroad system for moving troops, and a little bit of the element of surprise that the Prussians were ready to go when the Austrians were not. The important part to remember about this war is the end of it. At the end of it, Bismarck gives Austria a very lenient peace. Now, he's careful to take the territories that he wants, but he is not going to hammer them. And the reason that he's not going to hammer them is he wants to make sure that when he goes to war with France, down the road somewhere, that the Austrians sit by and let it happen. Last war, the Franco-Prussian War. And here again, we need the French to attack. We need the French to be the aggressors, and then the Prussians can sit aside and say, wow, why'd you attack me? That wasn't very nice. That wasn't very nice. Okay? And so that's what Bismarck does. He comes up with that Ems dispatch that we looked at in class, where he gets Napoleon III just angry enough, and he just waves the red flag at the Gallic bull. That's the phrase. And he gets Napoleon III to attack him, which is just a horrible idea. But Napoleon III does it. Now, where's everybody else while this is going on, Holiday? The English, splendid isolation, off on their own. The Russians, we'll talk about them in a moment, but the Russians are not going to help out the Austrians, right? Remember, the Austrians bailed on them in the Crimean War. The French, we're going to deal with in French here in a moment, but then you've also got to worry about the Italians. Both of the second two wars, the Austro-Prussian and the Franco-Prussian wars, the Italians are given territories by simply sitting on the sideline. Bismarck's careful, right? You never attack an opponent until you know where all of its neighbors are going to go when the attack starts. He neutralizes everybody, he prepares for the wars, and by doing so, he creates a successful German state. In the midst of all that melee of the Franco-Prussian War, a small group of workers rise in Paris, take over the city, and try to govern through what's called the Paris Commune. Now, eventually they're going to get squashed, but for a brief moment, guys like Marx thought, oh yeah, baby, the revolution was happening. The working classes were rising. Ah! Didn't happen. Didn't happen. Okay? Let's talk about the Austrians and the Hungarians, I beg your pardon. When Austria loses the Austro-Prussian War, the Hungarians realize that the Austrians are in a really weak position, and they could maybe send a Hallmark card and give them a hug, or, better option, they could force the Austrians' hand and ask for more control over their own state, which they did. So the Hungarians playing that real politics as well, waiting for the exact moment when your opponent is at their weakness and threatening to kick them in the head one more time. It's not a very friendly way to go about business, but it sure worked. In Russia, we're looking at Tsar Alexander II, the liberator. Now, Alexander II passes a number of reforms that should go down in history as making Russia a better place. Unfortunately, a group of people who thought he hadn't done enough blew him up. But one of the things he did was he freed the serfs. He gave the serfs, the landed people of Russia, their freedom. In order to try and make sure that they could deal with that freedom, he created the Mir, the MIR. Now, the Mir are meant to be village communes or economic systems that are in charge of paying back the debts the serfs owe to the landowners and also making sure that the serfs make good use of that land they've just been given. The Zemstvos are little governing councils where the best people of the village get their complaints together and then they send those up the chain to the Tsar. Unfortunately, this is a country of 300 million people. And with no elected assembly, no Congress, no parliament, no estates general, how are 300 million people going to let one guy know what their individual problems are? Alexander II did some things, but he certainly didn't do enough. And that's one of the reasons that he gets blown up. Last page, we're rolling. Some realist medicine, some big achievements, pasteurization, the movement towards what we're going to call germ theory, understanding where infection comes from, Lister and the antiseptic principle, which is going to revolutionize the way we do surgeries, Comte, talking about sociology and the combination of all the disciplines into one group, and finally the realist artist. Now in class, we haven't even looked at him yet, but I bet when I show him to you, you're going to go, is that art? Is that really art? I guess. Okay. Now, realist artists aren't going to show you a man galloping down a canyon on a horse to fight a dragon, because most people don't gallop down canyons to fight dragons. They break rocks, right? They work in a store. They sift grain. That's what they do. That most people's lives are not romantic, huge nationalist triumphs where you can hear the music in the background. No, most people's lives are kind of humdrum. They're kind of average, and that's what the realists are doing. Not only in their paintings, but in their art, in their in their novels as well. We're going to see that happening as well. Okay, that's the end of the unit, folks. I hope it helps. We've got a test coming up, not this week right here, but the week afterward, towards the end of January and the early part of February. Work hard, ladies and gentlemen. Take care.